Hello, everyone, and welcome to this installment of Illuminating Conversations. It is my absolute pleasure to have with us today Nolan Bushnell, a famous inventor and entrepreneur, and I'm amazed what he has done throughout his life. Many people know Nolan as the person who started and founded Atari. He is the creator of the famous game named Pong, which people of my generation and all of my friends played at home and really couldn't gravitate away from it. It was so addicting and we had so much fun at it. He has done many things, and he has said in his speeches, he's made more money than anybody he knows, but also lost more money than anybody he knows because he's a prolific inventor and execution person. And I thought it would be great to have him on the show today to talk to us about what he sees in the gaming industry in terms of skill-based gaming and things like that. He not only created Atari and Pong, but he is also credited with creating the Chuck E. Cheese Pizza Time Theater. And we all know about Chuck E. Cheese and taking our kids there. But some other things you might not know. He has started up more than 20 companies, but one of the companies he started was Catalyst Technologies. And I had no idea, Nolan, that you mapped out for the first time digital mapping. And those maps today are credited with the basis of Google Maps, in-car navigation systems, and so many things that we take for granted today. And you saw it before anybody else did. We're going to get into his relationship with Steve Jobs, but Nolan has the honor of being the only person that ever hired Steve Jobs. And he talks about this in his 2013 book, Finding the Next Steve Jobs. Currently, he's doing a lot of stealth things, working on various boards, working with Synergy Blue, but he's also had many accolades. He's known as the father of electronic gaming, was really the guy who started electronic at-home gaming and going to arcades and video and Pong and all those things that came after it. But he's also been recognized as one of the 50 people who changed America. So we're really happy to have you with us today, Nolan. And thank you for joining us. It's really my pleasure to have you.
Hey, it's great to be here. And, I'm talking to you from my lab. So, in the middle of this, I'm going to be inventing something, maybe.
I hope you really do. I want to take you back to the beginning because your beginning, you characterized it in things that you've written as almost, three lucky breaks and three lucky unrelated things that caused you to even get into the video game industry. One of them is when you were just out of college. I know you went to college at University of Utah. You had an opportunity to work at an arcade. And after a year or two, they thought so much of you that they made you a manager of this arcade. And that's when you really started to get your first feeling as to what is it going to take to make people have a fun time with games. Can you talk a little bit about what was going on in that period of your life? And how did you stumble into this world of video game and video gaming?
Well, it was actually summers while I was still in college that I was working at an amusement park. And this was, ball throwing games, things like that. But one of the parts was also an arcade. And so I became manager of that when they made me manager of the whole department. So in some ways, I look at that as kind of my 20-year-old MBA because I was running 150 kids and a $3 million operation during the 4 months of the summer. And it was a happy accident because I got in it for totally wrong reasons. It was really about having a fun job in the summer because my daytime was, I actually had the campus company, which was selling advertising.
Right. And you fell into it. You said there were three lucky things that happened. And it was around you were at the right place with regard to engineering and the right place around putting video for the first time on large computers. Tell us a little about the very early days. We all take video monitors for granted today, but in the early days, that wasn't the case. Tell us a
Yeah,
little bit about it.
in the early days of computers, the standard output was actually a line printer. It was it was all paper.
Right,
When I'd turn in a stack of Hollerith cards with my Fortran program on it, I'd get back 20 pages of printout.
right,
That was it. However, Dr. Evans felt that the future was going to be video screens, and he later went on to found Evans and Sutherland. He was one of the professors in the engineering department that I was there. So summer at the coin operated game world in the arcade, winters with Dr. Evans hooking video screens up to computers. And it was at that time that I said, man, if I could take this monitor and put a coin slot on it, it'd make money in my arcade. But then you divide 3 minutes times 25 cents into a $500,000 computer, and the math didn't work.
right.
So I thought to myself, well, maybe, because prices were coming down on compute. And I said, maybe one of these days. Graduated, went to Ampex, and the third happy accident, I was in a section that was creating digital signal processing for monitors. So I really learned from a digital standpoint how to use MSI circuitry, which was brand new,
Right.
and so it was called TTL, and
You
I
merged
was
them
off
all
to the
together and
races.
you're on your way. You know,
Yeah,
the Pong game stands out to people as the first game that we all just played and loved, and we could play it by ourselves. We could also play it against people, and you would beat up on people. And really, people remember Pac-Man, but Pong was well before that. But you came out with a quote that it's largely attributed to you, that you believe that the success of Pong was, they call it Bushnell's Law. This is literally something that's out there in game design. The game has to be easy to learn, but difficult to master. And you need a reward from the first quarter to the max amount of money
right.
that you play. And Pong was one of those games that it looked easy when you started, but it would escalate up, and then it would always be hard to master. Do you find that law is really what's behind any game that's really successful?
Well, it's primarily, there are board games that have a rule book that's that's
Right.
as long as an encyclopedia, but that's out in the 2 and 3 sigma points of things. But if you want the mass group, simple to learn, hard to master is the catchphrase.
The audience should, if you want to see some great reading and videos, first of all, you should go and see Nolan's Wikipedia page. It goes on forever. It really highlights his life. That's great. All those great things that he's done. But also you've given many speeches, and one was at Google. And I was watching your speech at Google. It runs for over an hour, but I watched the entire hour, and it was really fascinating. But in that speech, you talk to the crowd and the people there about execution, how execution, it's great to have an idea, great to get a patent, but if you don't do anything with it and you don't execute, it's just a heap of junk. There's no excuse that someone else stole your idea, because really you're at fault, I think, as you said. Why don't you expand upon that about how important execution is, and how important it is to execute through on your own ideas and not blame others?
I assert that when you get an idea, you actually don't own that idea. It's just kind of flopping around there. The fact that you thought of it, no big deal. People think of things all the time. But in order to own that idea, you have to work on it. You have to flesh it out. You have to write it out. I get quoted all the time saying, every idiot that's ever had a shower has had a good idea. It's the ones that come out, dry themselves out, and work on the idea that make the difference.
Right.
And that's really, really true. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Execution means everything.
And Nolan, also in that talk, we talk about the right environment for innovation. And you talk about this extensively. It's not a publicly traded company that measures everybody in 13-week increments. You also talk a bit about what the flow is and how you get people into the flow, and that causes creativity. In the gaming industry, some would say that we sometimes lack some creativity. How do you apply the flow theory and innovation, and what would be the best advice you could give a CEO to get people to innovate, or allow them to innovate, or give them that freedom to innovate?
Say yes. I mean, I think that most industries are excessively bureaucratic. That, if you count the steps between you, CEO, or you and the chairman, the more steps, the less likely you are to be innovative. And you really need to have skunk works that are sort of decoupled from the name corporate culture. When we wanted to start something like Chuck E. Cheese was actually, I started it inside Atari. After I sold it to Warner, they put back because they didn't want to be in the food business. But Chuck E. Cheese was so different that I actually set up it was like a different company that had its own management, only reported to me, and they were able to innovate because there wasn't anybody in the way saying no. Everybody was saying yes. And when Jobs was working for me, he started seeing that. I actually set Jobs up as a separate sort of little division, if you would, on the night shift. He was the only one there, and he did Breakout, totally off the regular standard structure, and it was a huge success for us.
Yeah, so I want to launch in that. So you started Atari, and I think I told you in our previous conversation that I thought that was a Japanese company. I didn't even know it was Nolan Bushnell. But Atari you started, and you're credited with being the only one in Steve Jobs' life to hire him. The only other person I could arguably say they hired him was when the Apple board hired him back after they fired him, and then they messed up whatever they were doing, and they hired him back, and he took it. What was it like working with Steve Jobs and being the only one to ever hire him?
First of all, Steve was brilliant, and he had one speed, full on. He was one of the few employees I ever would find sleeping under his desk in Monday morning when when I'd come in.
Right.
But Steve was quirky, and I learned a lot from Steve, actually.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what did you learn from Steve, and what could you say that you taught Steve? So answer it either way.
I'm pretty sure that the thing that I encouraged Steve, though I think he had proclivities in that direction anyway, to trust your instincts. That if you think you're right, don't worry about consensus. Consensus breeds mediocrity. The more radical your idea is, the less likely you are to get a consensus. And that's just the nature of the world.
Right.
If I come up with something that is world-shattering, but really weird, I can go in a room of 100 people, and there'll be maybe 2 that think that would vote with me.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that nobody can get their minds around it.
What do you think he taught you?
The value of good design.
Good.
And he was really a stickler for being, rounded edges, that sort of thing. And it was just at the start where I was starting to think the idea that I wanted my coin-op games to be identifiable, even if they were across the room and you didn't know what the game was. I wanted the color palettes and the graphic style and everything to be a consistent, banner for what Atari stood for. And as a result, there've been books that have been written about the Atari style,
Right.
which was unique and it carried through to the consumer market.
You've often written about the time that Steve Jobs offered you a third of Apple, I think, for $50,000 when he had this idea, and you often say it's the one deal that you probably definitely know you should have taken now.
Yeah. Well, I said no for the reason that I felt that he was not ready for a CEO position.
Right.
And he wasn't. And I think that the fact that the person who did take my position was Mike Markkula, and he basically was the first president of Apple and was the mentor of Steve in terms of him growing up into a successful CEO.
Your history is fascinating. And not only have you done Atari and Pong and started out with Steve Jobs and all this other technology that you created in Silicon Valley that really has formed the basis for whether it was Chuck E. Cheese or the navigation systems or some of the baseline technology that we now just all take for granted today. But that is all great that you've done. But wanted to have you here today because I think the gaming industry continues to struggle around coming up with super successful skill games. And I know you were with Synergy Blue, or you are with Synergy Blue as a consultant. What advice do you have to give us in the gaming industry about how do we make a world-class, super fun skill game that really catches on fire?
The rules are the same. They got to be simple to learn and difficult to master. And it's not rocket science. When I see a lot of the skill-based games out there in this format, they're horrible. You don't know what's going on. You don't know why it's doing what it's doing, and you have no idea of why. If you're winning, you don't know why, and if you're losing, you don't know why. And those are just no-nos. And we had a whole series of games that were very, very simple, and they were going to be in the market next year, but then COVID came along and everything kind of went sideways. And
but you often say,
so I expect to see them.
You often say that there's two types of games. There's the games where you're playing against the computer. I think you might call it like a Zynga game, and games where you're playing against other people where the ability or skill is dominant. Do you think we
Correct.
should be creating games what's your advice in each of those separate universes?
The big issue with playing against other people is handicapping. And I've often thought that we should do some blockchain proof of play, proof of score. And if you have a lifelong history of game playing that is immutable and authenticated, what have you, that's the ideal world for creating handicap system. And I think if we can do that, that really change everything, because
so that would be almost like in golf. Someone follows every player in the world. You have to put your golf score in no matter what, and someone else is counting your strokes, so you're not cheating. And it always goes into the computer. So wherever you show up to play, we know how people are relatively matched, and you use a handicap to almost level the playing field each and every time.
Precisely. And watch, this is a commercial break. Watch for Moxie Token, which is going to be doing a thing we call proof of play. Right. And the token with a smart contract will start to track.
Well, I think you broke up a little bit. What was the name of that again?
Moxie token.
Very cool. Now, we talk about video games and playing against a computer like Pong or Breakout or like two people playing against each other, which Pong was. But I know that you've been very active in esports, and I know that you're on an advisor on a board advising an esports company, which is interesting because esports is everybody thinks that that's the next big thing. Talk to me a little about what's good about esports today, what can be improved.
Esports is important because there's a series. There are people who do things when they're kids and they want to continue to experience the game, but from a spectator standpoint as opposed to a participant, where you basically love to see people who are mavens, who are wonderful at the particular game. I mean, why do you watch basketball? Because LeBron James is amazing.
Right.
Why do you watch baseball? And so, but you have an affinity for it because you played it when you were in high school or college or even the Sandlot.
Right.
Same thing's happening with esports. Esports, however, has a couple of things that bother me. And I don't want to say they're wrong with it, but one is that you age out of esports very, very quickly. You lose about a millisecond of reaction time for every year you're over 26. And so, if you just don't see any 27-year-old esports champions,
Right.
you occasionally see a 14-year-old, but you never see a 27-year-old,
Right.
And so that aging out bothers me. The other problem is latency. Tournaments tend to be required to be in one big ballroom so that everybody is one router hop from the server, and speed of light's not an issue. But you can't play San Francisco against Tokyo because the latency and the router hops and the speed of light will benefit one player over the other in terms of the latency of what they're doing. And so that's another problem, because I think in order for esports to really be dominant, it's important that it becomes something that can be done internationally.
You also have talked a bit about the fact that some of the games have a set map. And if you play it long enough, you can memorize every corner, every hallway, every room, who might pop out when. And
exactly.
And how would you fix that so it's more, I'll call it randomized. You can use another word if you want.
I call it procedurally generated, in which you basically, have graphic elements. And at the beginning of every game, you shake them up, pull them out of the hat, arrange them in a new way, and all of a sudden you have a brand new map. And then you add what I call the fog of war. And what you're doing then is trying to move it a little way from just twitch. He who has the fastest reaction time wins, to stealth and guile. And that's where us older people who are tricky and have been able to survive long because we're trickier than the other person.
Right.
Then all of a sudden a 40, 50, 60-year-old, maybe even a 70-year-old has a fighting chance because we're tricky.
Well, I know that we have been at it in the gaming industry for probably more than 5 or 6 years, trying to come up with really cool skill games, really cool esports, figuring out how to have people engage in the game, engage with others, group play, competitions against each other, but at least make it fun so everybody wins something, that there isn't just somebody who loses all of the money to somebody else. And that's where I think you talked to us a bit about being using blockchain in a way of giving everybody a handicap, so everybody has a fighting chance to get lucky maybe and win rather than continuing to lose. And you think that's
Exactly.
a key, and that's a key part going forward, you think?
Well, I've got a repertoire of games that I think need to be made. And if you ever really need one of those, let me know and I'll figure out a deal for you.
Hey, Nolan, I wanted to bring that up. Even after all of these years, and your bio is so impressive, you're still inventing on a daily basis, aren't you?
I am. And
that's what drives you.
I've got a couple of really big hobby horses right now, really big. The one is I've got a manifesto to change education through gameplay.
Ah.
And I actually think that I can create a school metric in which you can teach 4 years of high school in 6 months. And online, very, very powerful, teacher assisted, but not teacher driven.
Ah.
And I think that we will be launching in September. The company's name is LearnUp, and I'll be publishing a book, which is essentially a manifesto. My rule is don't piss and moan about something unless you have a solution. So there's a lot of books that piss and moan about the failure of education, what's going wrong with education. I've got a book about how to fix everything.
Well, I know that many CEOs would listen to you and say how many times people bring them problems rather than bring them solutions. And that book sounds very timely. I did want to ask, sometimes people ask other people, who do you look up to or what's your favorite quote? But I'm going to ask you something a little different here. What is the favorite Nolan Bushnell quote that you've used and it's been repeated? So what do you think your best quote is that you've put out there that really says the most about your life and your career, or just how to make the world a better place?
Anyone who's ever had a shower has had a good idea. It's the person who gets out of the shower and does something that makes a difference. If everybody followed that axiom, the world belongs to doers, not thinkers.
And I think that's a fair point. Many books have been written about execution and the failure to execute, and execution is the whole ballgame. The ideas are great, but if you don't execute it, it's, as you said, it's just an idea in a pile. With that, I want to thank you. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a codicil to that is enthusiasm. Hire for enthusiasm. People who are enthusiastic make a difference, and they are the problem solvers. They are the execute. They execute.
Right.
Hire for optimism. You don't start something if you think you're going to fail.
Wasn't that your idea around the graphic about how to hire people and get them in the flow? It's enthusiasm. It's a special type of person. When you were speaking at Google, you were telling them it's a special type of person you're actually looking for. Someone who's enthusiastic, wants to sleep under their desk, so to speak, just wants to keep going until they solve the problem. It's almost like a personal game to solve a problem.
Exactly.
Isn't that what you call the flow? You call it flow, right?
Flow is actually a term that was coined by a guy named Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, who was a Hungarian. You can't, if you see his name written, it's all consonants and no vowels.
Right.
The Italians stole all the vowels. He created a thing called flow, and I realized that when we create a video game, that's what we're doing. Because when you're in the flow state, first of all, you're learning faster than ever before. Second of all, time stands still, speeds up. There's no such thing as attention deficit disorder playing a game. You
Right.
All of a sudden, You can take a kid who's been diagnosed with ADD, you can put him in front of the right game, and all of a sudden he'll lose track of time and play it for an hour and a half.
Right.
You know, that's the power of properly structured gameplay. And I'm planning to integrate that into education. The company is LearnUp. And do you know what the most powerful thing in the world is?
What's that?
An executed idea. And what you want actually is everybody in the world to want to copy you because it's right. You know, so if you're doing something that's good for the world, put it out there, open source, what have you. Because if everybody copies you and it's the right thing, you can change the world.
And change the world will be a better place. Well, with that, I know that we're running out of time today, but I want to thank you, Nolan. I never thought in my life I'd be speaking to the guy who started Atari, started Chuck E. Cheese, created Pong, and is still doing these things 60 years after showing up at the initial arcade and trying to figure out what will make the game tick. So I thank you so much for joining us today. I encourage the audience to, again, Wikipedia, lots of videos online, his talk at Google and other talks that he's given, which will give you a much bigger thing. And we hope that your movie comes out. I know that it's been on and off, and hopefully someone will make a movie about your life, because your life has certainly been interesting as the person who's made the most and lost the most money in a lifetime. So thank you very much, Nolan.
You know, making and losing money, that's a story in and of itself.
That is. We could spend another hour talking about that. But thank you very much, Nolan, for us today. And I look forward to seeing all of you on our next installment of Illuminating Conversations.
Thank you.